Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The mysterious case of Johnia Berry. In a small American town called Bristol, Tennessee, Johnia Berry was born on August 26, 1983. She was a happy and friendly person who had many friends and loved to have fun at parties. When she was in school, she was also part of the local cheerleading team. After finishing high school, Johnia went to East Tennessee State University to study psychology and criminology. During her college years, she met Jason White, and they became a couple, eventually getting engaged right before they graduated. In late 2004, when she was 21 years old, Johnia decided to get a master's degree in psychology. This led her to move temporarily to Knoxville, another city, for her studies. While studying, she worked part-time at a children's educational center and discovered her passion for helping children. Her boyfriend, Jason, continued his studies in a different state, working towards a law degree. Even though they were far apart, they stayed in touch and planned their wedding. In Knoxville, Johnia initially stayed in her friend Jason Amami's apartment. They both went to college together and later moved to Knoxville. They shared an apartment with 2 bedrooms, and Jason let Johnia stay there until she found her own place. Johnia had 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the Sunday night of December 5th, after finishing work at the store, Johnia went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. When she got back home, she wrapped presents for the children at the educational center, talked to her neighbor, and then went to her room. She also spoke to her boyfriend on the phone before going to bed. Around 4 in the morning, Jason Amami heard a scream from a woman. He thought Johnia was having a bad dream, so he went to her room. But instead, he found a stranger with a knife. The stranger attacked Jason, and they had a fight. Eventually, Jason managed to push the attacker away and ran out of the apartment. He went to the nearest convenience store, which was almost a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerk saw Jason, who was covered in blood, they called 911. Jason explained what had happened to the police when they arrived. The police went to their apartment and found Johnia in the hallway that connected 5 apartments. She was still alive but barely conscious. When they asked her about the attacker, she could only give weak clues. The police searched the whole building and the area nearby, but they couldn't find the attacker. They rushed Johnia to the nearest hospital, but the doctors couldn't save her, even though they tried their best. The doctors said she had more than 20 stab wounds, and it was very unlikely she could survive. As for Jason, he had 8 wounds from the attacker, but only one was very serious. He got medical help, and his life was not in danger. Meanwhile, the detectives started to investigate the crime scene. They found blood in the hallway, showing that Johnia had tried to ask her neighbors for help, but no one had opened their doors. Right next to Johnia's room, they found the murder weapon, which turned out to be a kitchen knife that belonged to Jason. The attacker had used it with such force that it got bent and damaged. The police also found blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. Since Jason and Johnia had left through the front door, the detectives thought the most likely explanation was that the killer had escaped through the back door. In Jason's room, they discovered another clue, a partial footprint, which the attacker might have left when he followed Jason and attacked him. Because of the brutal way the attacker had taken Johnia's life, the police suspected that the motive behind the crime was personal. At first, the detectives started looking into Johnia's boyfriend, even though he was far away, about 1,000 kilometers from Knoxville. But all his friends and family said that Johnia and her boyfriend had a wonderful relationship, and he had no reason to commit such a cruel crime. He found out about Johnia's death when her mother called him at 10 in the morning. He said that after hearing the news, he fainted and took a long time to recover. He was in no condition to do anything, so he had to ask his neighbor to help him book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. The investigators carefully checked his alibi and realized that he couldn't have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by morning. So, they ruled him out as a suspect and turned their attention to Johnia's neighbor instead. In contrast to the victim's boyfriend, this neighbor had no solid alibi and had been inside the apartment with her, raising suspicions that he might be the culprit. Friends and family of Johnia were also skeptical of him. Some believed he could be the likely killer, while others accused him of fleeing the apartment, leaving Johnia behind. This suspicion ran so deep that the victim's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. Shortly after Jason was released from the hospital, investigators began questioning him. He stuck to his initial account. He heard screams, saw an unfamiliar man, and was attacked. After managing to fend off the attacker, Jason rushed to the front door and out into the street, seeking help from the neighbors. He believed that Johnia had also managed to escape the apartment because he couldn't hear her screams. However, the police had reservations about accepting this version of events. What initially raised doubts about Jason were his injuries. 7 of the 8 wounds were superficial, and the last one on his right arm could have been acquired either while defending himself or during an attack. Additionally, investigators found no signs of forced entry into the apartment, suggesting that the person responsible might have been inside already. Jason claimed that he had taken out the trash through the back door that night, but couldn't remember if he had locked it or not. Detectives continued to press him, paying close attention to which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason insisted that he had left through the front door, but the police suspected he might be lying. If Jason had indeed exited through the back door, it would explain the presence of bloodstains near the door leading to the stairs, further raising suspicions against him. Moreover, the police accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of being aggressive when he couldn't get his fix. The young man denied all these allegations, but investigators continued to level various charges against him. After several hours at the police station, the detectives proposed a polygraph test of him. Surprisingly, Jason agreed. The investigators brought in an expert who asked him leading questions, and at the end of the session, they informed him that he had failed the test, indicating that he was providing false answers. Upon hearing this, Jason became emotionally distraught, shouting that he had nothing to do with the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real criminal was still on the loose. However, the detectives remained unconvinced. Nevertheless, they couldn't charge him with the murder due to the lack of concrete evidence. They had to wait for laboratory experts to complete their examination of the few pieces of evidence found in the apartment, and an unexpected twist soon emerged. During their analysis of the murder weapon, the knife, they discovered 3 DNA samples, those of the deceased girl, Jason, and an unidentified man. Additionally, the unknown man's DNA was found in Johnia's room, on the back door handle, and on the staircase used by the criminal to exit onto the street. Furthermore, they uncovered a fingerprint on the knife handle, marked by the victim's blood, that did not match Jason's fingerprint. These discoveries led the police to doubt that Jason was the murderer. The evidence strongly indicated that another person had been in the apartment that night. However, when they checked the DNA sample against existing databases, they found no matches. Even though investigators had ruled out Jason as a suspect, public opinion continued to cast doubt on him, accusing him of leaving his girlfriend behind and fleeing instead of protecting her. Furthermore, Jason started experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. A significant development soon came to light. It was revealed that the polygraph operator had misinterpreted the test results, and there was no indication that Jason was lying. Additionally, there was no concrete evidence linking the young man to illegal substances. It had been used as leverage, but more importantly, the severity of Jason's injuries had been initially underestimated. In reality, Jason had suffered serious damage to his lung and neck, with little hope for a full recovery. Due to these inaccuracies in police reports, the insurance company only covered 25% of his treatment costs, leaving Jason facing severe financial hardship. Once the police no longer considered him a suspect, they began questioning Jason as a witness. From his account, they managed to create a rough description of the attacker. The situation was complicated by the fact that Jason hadn't gotten a clear look at the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had pounced on him as soon as he exited the room. The investigators also stumbled upon something intriguing in Johnia's room: a cap, along with discs, and a stereo player near the back staircase. Initially, they thought these items might belong to either the victim or Jason, but Jason denied any connection to them. According to him, none of these items were in his apartment, suggesting they were left behind by the killer. The investigators shared a rough sketch of the suspect with the media, and after it was publicized, the police received hundreds of leads. People reported individuals who vaguely resembled the sketch, prompting detectives to pursue each of these leads. One lead stood out to the investigators. They learned about a group of teenagers in the area who had been breaking into houses with the intent to steal. One of these teenagers, a 19-year-old named Michael, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police initiated a search for him, which was complicated because he was already wanted for theft. Now, with the possibility of his involvement in a murder, 2 police units joined the search for Michael. They eventually located him and brought him in for questioning. The investigators immediately focused on Michael's shoes, which had a tread pattern similar to the footprint left by the killer. They collected a DNA sample and fingerprints from Michael and sent them to the experts for analysis. Meanwhile, they interrogated him, and during this process, they received an unexpected revelation. Michael quickly admitted that he and a friend had indeed entered Johnia's apartment that night. According to his account, they had planned to steal valuable items, but his friend had taken a knife and attacked Johnia. However, the detectives soon began to doubt Michael's story. Firstly, the details he provided didn't align with the actual events. Secondly, there was no evidence of the presence of 2 strangers at the crime scene. The laboratory results further confirmed their skepticism. Michael's DNA and fingerprints did not match those found at the murder scene. The same held true for his shoes. The tread pattern did not match the one in Jason's room. Ultimately, the police concluded that Michael had fabricated the story. While it may sound unusual, such false admissions occur relatively frequently in high-profile cases. Some individuals falsely claim guilt for various reasons, including seeking attention or hoping for a reward for information. It remains unclear what motivated Michael, but his story turned out to be entirely untrue. Following that, investigators interviewed over 1,000 potential suspects and gathered around 400 DNA samples, but none of them matched the evidence. Early in the investigation, a reward had been offered for information leading to the case's resolution. As each month passed, the reward amount increased, and by December 2005, 1 year after the murder, it had reached $60,000. Adding to this, the state governor chipped in an additional $20,000 from his own funds, drawing even more public attention to the case. Despite the abundance of leads, all of them eventually led to dead ends, and the case remained unsolved for several years. In 2007, the victims' parents decided to take action by seeking changes in state legislation. They found it perplexing that the fingerprints and DNA of the murderer were not in any databases. Given the brutality of the crime, the parents refused to believe it was the perpetrator's first offense. They later discovered that, according to Tennessee laws, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from convicted criminals. Johnia's parents were determined to change this. They played an active role in crafting a new law that mandated the collection of these samples from all individuals arrested for violent crimes. Authorities supported this initiative, and the law was enacted in May 2007. 2 months later, a breakthrough occurred in the case. The police arrested Taylor Lee Olson, a 22-year-old, for violating the terms of his probation. Olson had a long history of criminal activities, primarily involving theft, check forgery, and auto theft, and he had been arrested multiple times before. Surprisingly, his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected, even though he had a history of run-ins with the law. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, but his criminal activities persisted. It was revealed that Olson had already come to the investigators' attention 5 months earlier when they received a tip about his possible involvement in the murder. However, for reasons unknown, the police had not pursued DNA samples for analysis at that time. Nevertheless, with his new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him about Johnia's case. Olson eventually confessed his involvement in the murder and willingly provided a DNA sample. When the lab results came in, it was confirmed that Taylor's DNA was a complete match with the sample found in the victim's apartment. Following this, they collected his fingerprints, which also matched the fingerprint on the murder weapon. Olson was subsequently arrested, and detectives began to question him. Initially, Olson said he was not guilty, but he eventually decided to confess to his actions. Taylor claimed that on that night, he had intended to steal Johnia's car and had entered her apartment through the back door to find the car keys. When he entered her room, she woke up and began screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. However, he insisted that he hadn't intended to kill anyone, and it had all occurred accidentally. Detectives had doubts about the truthfulness of some details and leaned towards believing that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible that he had been stalking the victim for some time, indirectly supported by the fact that Johnia's friends had reported someone following her in a car. At the time, no evidence was found to substantiate this, but after Olson's arrest, it seemed increasingly plausible. Despite this, there was little doubt about his culpability. His DNA and fingerprints were present on the murder weapon, strongly indicating his involvement. Olson's trial was slated to commence in mid-2008, and by that point, he had already retained a lawyer. Apparently, his legal counsel advised him to retract his confession, and Taylor presented a new version of events to the detectives. Now, he claimed that he had entered Johnia's apartment with his friend named Noah Cox. According to this revised account, when Olson entered Johnia's room to retrieve the car keys, she allegedly woke up, seized a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then fled through the back door, while his friend entered Johnia's room, disarmed her, and killed her. This new narrative raised suspicions among the police. They found no fingerprints or DNA from other individuals at the crime scene, making it appear unlikely that anyone else was involved. Detectives awaited the start of the trial, but it never occurred. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Alongside him, several suicide notes were discovered, addressed to his family, Johnia's relatives, and the police. In the note to the detectives, he once again alleged that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator and also apologized to Johnia's family and his own. Detectives continued to believe that Olson was responsible for the murder and repeatedly questioned Noah. However, they found no evidence implicating him. Johnia's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was lying. In their view, if Taylor was truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed more likely that he simply did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Furthermore, for several months following his initial confession, Olson had consistently maintained that he had entered the apartment alone and that there was no one else with him. The sudden change in his story to shift blame onto his friend raised further doubts. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Crime Analysis Central. See you soon. Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The case of the Kyoto Animation Studio massacre. On the morning of July 18, 2019, thousands of Japanese people in the city of Kyoto were surprised in the middle of their usual morning activities by a very unusual event. That morning, out of nowhere, the entire city could hear the sound of multiple ambulances and fire trucks racing through Kyoto with their sirens blaring, startling the entire population. Most Japanese who witnessed the massive mobilization of ambulances and patrols couldn't help but wonder what could be the cause of this, while simultaneously thinking that whatever it was, it had to be something serious because all these vehicles seemed to be heading to the same location, disregarding the usual heavy traffic in Kyoto mid-morning, causing all cars and bicycles on the road to give way to the authorities. By 11 a.m. on this summer morning, it became apparent to the population that indeed, all this professional equipment was heading to the same building. Emergency services had received multiple calls reporting an explosion heard around 10:30 in the morning, and the worst part was that the building was reported to be engulfed in flames. As the fire quickly spread throughout the first floor, most of the people inside couldn't escape the flames. This place was an office complex belonging to the company Kyoto Animation, an animation studio founded in 1981 that had produced various anime and manga novels of all kinds. Throughout its history, it has released great works that have captivated both Japanese and international audiences due to its high production standards. Alerted by the calls they had received, which evidenced the severity of the situation, the emergency services instructed all available personnel to arrive at the scene as quickly as possible. When they arrived at the building, the situation looked much worse than expected. Several neighbors who lived nearby were observing the scene from what they thought was a safe distance while they waited for the firefighters and paramedics. The scene of the fire was, to put it mildly, disheartening. The flames enveloped the entire building and leaked out of the windows, creating long tongues of fire that immediately hindered the efforts of the firefighters trying to contain the fire and rescue those who were still trapped inside what had become a deadly concrete trap. The police officers began to instruct the neighbors to move further away from the scene, as in many cases of fires and explosions, there was a significant possibility that the building could collapse. According to reports at the time, There were 73 company employees working there at the moment of the fire. From the moment they set foot on the street, the paramedics knew they had a lot of work to do, because even the employees who had managed to escape the offices were now at the foot of the burning building, seriously injured, some unable to move or unconscious. Most of them had suffered terrible injuries and cuts while trying to exit the building. The most terrible part was that most of them had severe third-degree burns. These are classified as such because they affect the deepest layers of the skin and require immediate medical attention, as they have a high risk of infection. Additionally, when a person has these burns in multiple parts of their body, or almost entirely, as was the case with some of these studio workers, the chances of losing their life are very high. For this reason, it was crucial that the workers receive timely treatment, so emergency doctors began to separate the injured according to the severity of their injuries in order to assist those who needed urgent medical help. This way, the most affected individuals began to be stabilized before being transported to the hospital by ambulance. At this point, the number of severely injured people was so high that more than 30 ambulances had to be mobilized in total to transport the victims of the supposed accident. It's important to clarify that the authorities believed before arriving at the scene that this was an accidental fire. However, what was happening just a block away from the scene would give a very drastic twist to this story. Just 100 meters from the burning building, some police officers from a nearby train station were detaining a man who had been chased there by Kyoto Animation employees. The man had serious burns on his face and various parts of his body. This raised several questions because why would the authorities subdue a man who appeared to be a victim of the fire? In addition to all this, multiple witnesses were reporting to the police officers present at the scene that they had seen a man enter the animation studio around 10:30 that morning with what appeared to be bottles of gasoline. So with this and the testimonies of the survivors of the tragedy who were conscious, the authorities understood that this was an arson attack and therefore a mass murder. When the firefighters were able to control the fire enough to enter the building and analyze the scene, they observed that the death toll of this tragedy had risen to 34 people. Shortly after, it would increase to 36, as 2 of the injured, suffering from the effects of their burns, could not endure any longer and lost their lives. The man was arrested, as the same employees who had pursued him claimed that he was responsible, and the same police officers who had arrested him during his transfer to the hospital testified that this man began shouting that yes, he was the one who had caused the fire at Kyoto Animation, justifying it by saying that everyone inside deserved to die because they had stolen his work without giving him any recognition. Once at the hospital, the first thing known was that the suspect's name was Shinji Aoba, and he was 41 years old. He had many injuries covering his entire body from the fire he allegedly caused. Once his wounds had healed enough for him to be kept in a cell without dying from an infection, a lengthy interrogation awaited him so that the entire country and the world would have an idea of what motivated him to commit such a horrible crime. Not much is known about this man's childhood, as his parents were born in a small village. Shinji's maternal grandfather was an honorable man who had taken on 2 jobs simultaneously to support his family. He mainly worked transporting goods by cart to Tokyo. He was considered a very kind and hardworking man, until one day he was diagnosed with advanced cancer and, unable to afford the treatment that would save him, he made the decision to take his own life to avoid burdening his family with the responsibility of helping him. Shinji's mother would meet the man who would become the father of her children during her adolescence. The problem arose because this man was almost 17 years older than her when they met, and it was known that he was married at the time. As a result, the woman's family strongly disapproved of their relationship, which is a very serious matter in Japan, as Japanese society places a significant emphasis on appearances. However, Against all odds, she escaped from her parents' home, never to return. After running away, she started working in a factory near Kyoto, and eventually, she got married with the older man. The couple had 3 children, of whom there is only information available about Shinji and his sister. After leading what seemed to be a relatively normal life, it appears that Shinji's mother wanted some excitement and began an affair with a much younger man than her husband. When she was caught, she left home, leaving her husband, who earned a living as a taxi driver, completely alone and responsible for their 3 children. This continued to be the family's normal life until 1999, when a car accident left the father paralyzed. He was subsequently fired from the taxi company where he worked, leaving the man, who was already struggling to make ends meet, without the possibility of working to pay rent and provide food for his 3 children. Faced with this overwhelming pressure and distress, the man made the tragic decision to end it all. Despite all this, up to a certain point, Shinji had led a relatively normal life in his youth. Nothing out of the ordinary happened during his high school years, and he even worked part-time as a document clerk for the government. After graduating, Shinji continued to work part-time at a supermarket, and when he reached his 20s, he decided to move to another city. Everything seemed to be going relatively well until his mother's disappearance and his father's death, which slowly caused his life to crumble. The young man increasingly lacked motivation to move forward, and just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, life dealt him another blow. Shinji's sister, about whom little information is available, was almost at the point of losing hope. On that day, this woman visited a temple in the city, where she started talking to a priest about all the pain she had suffered in recent years. She then prayed for the repose of her father's soul before leaving the temple without saying a word. The next day after this visit, her lifeless body was found in a hostel near the temple she had visited, and she was determined to be the cause of her own tragic ending. After his sister's death, Shinji's life began to spiral downhill. His mental and economic problems led him to commit a robbery in 2012, where he managed to escape with around 20,000 yen in his bag. However, he was arrested shortly afterward and subsequently sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Upon his release, Shinji became a complete social outcast. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. He had no family or friends, and he struggled to maintain any relationships due to his violent temper. This isolation led him to withdraw completely into his apartment. Like a significant portion of the Japanese population, Shinji loved manga and anime. Since childhood, he had dreamt of becoming a manga writer. Faced with a bleak future and difficulties finding employment, Shinji decided to pursue his dream. He began writing light novels and drawing manga panels. At this point, Shinji's story intersects with that of Kyoto Animation, a company with an excellent reputation not only in Japan, but also internationally. Kyoto Animation's specialty is depicting the wonders and dilemmas of everyday life. In other words, they create works with characters that look childlike or relatable, making it easy for viewers to connect with them quickly. However, they often incorporate plot twists that can leave you in tears. Every year, this animation company holds a manga and novel writing contest, where enthusiasts submit their works in the hopes of getting them published or adapted by the studio, or even turned into a big screen production. In 2018, Shinji submitted one of his novels for the contest, following all the specified steps. However, despite constantly checking his email for responses, he received no reply from the animation studio. As the days passed, 40-year-old Shinji felt that his hope of becoming a successful manga writer was slipping through his fingers. Several months later, on one of those afternoons when all Shinji did was watch anime and play video games, he started watching an anime produced by Kyoto Animation. The show told the story of high school students who were involved in long-distance shooting sports. That very afternoon, Shinji felt humiliated because he realized that his idea had been stolen. Yes, you heard it right. A giant studio worth millions of dollars had allegedly stolen his story, without giving him the slightest credit. Maybe they didn't steal his entire manga idea, but they had apparently lifted a scene directly from his work. Shinji was outraged because he believed that in the submission he had sent to Kyoto Animation, there was a rather inconsequential scene in which the anime's protagonists were in a supermarket buying discounted meat. According to him, this scene was identical to one in an episode of the show that had aired that week. The scene was quite generic and nothing out of the ordinary. However, likely due to his unstable mental state and isolation, Shinji couldn't stop obsessing over the idea that his idea had been stolen. He was filled with anger, wondering how they could have not even bothered to respond to his contest submission and had apparently taken advantage of his creativity without giving him the slightest credit. In reality, according to the studio, Shinji's novel submission had not passed the first elimination round conducted by the contest judges, which was why they hadn't bothered to contact him. Nevertheless, from the very beginning, Shinji demonstrated that he wasn't mentally well and acted on the belief that he had been personally attacked and blatantly robbed. All of this brings us to July 14, 2019, 4 days before the fire. 9 months earlier, Shinji had sent anonymous threats to Kyoto Animation, threatening them with death. Over 200 emails had been sent, and although employees had reported this to the police, nothing could be done because the emails were encrypted, and Shinji had waited for them to let their guard down. On that Sunday, a neighbor heard Shinji starting to hit the shared wall between their apartments. These two lived in apartments where every sound from the other side could be heard. Shinji, among them, used to be the noisiest, and they would occasionally bang on the walls to request silence from one another. However, this time, it turned out that the neighbor from the apartment above was moving, and consequently, they were the cause of the noise. The neighbor went to knock on Shinji's door, intending to explain that he wasn't the one making the noise, and to please stop banging on the wall. Before he had a chance to speak, Shinji angrily opened the door, grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, and yelled at him, "You're making too much noise. Shut up, or I'll kill you." Faced with this aggression, all of the neighbor's feelings turned to horror. From Shinji's demeanor, it was evident that he was perfectly capable of carrying out his threat. Without hesitation, he left the scene and called the police to report the assault. However, when the officers arrived at Shinji's apartment, he was already gone. It seems that this incident was the spark that would lead Shinji to commit his final act. The next day, Shinji took a bullet train to travel to Tokyo. He stayed in a hotel, and then, on Tuesday, headed to Kyoto, his final destination, where he stayed in another hotel. Several security cameras captured him in the areas near the animation studio. Several neighbors also remembered him clearly after the incident because Shinji wore the same red t-shirt and light jeans for all 4 days. Shinji spent several hours walking until he stopped at a store and bought a shopping cart. He then proceeded to a gas station where he bought 10 gallons of gasoline. With these supplies, Shinji stashed the cart and went to sleep, ready to carry out his evil plan early the next morning. On July 18, 2019, Shinji returned to the animation studio building around 10:30 in the morning, carrying his containers filled with gasoline. Upon entering, he blocked the 12 emergency exits and began to douse the studio with gasoline, taking advantage of the building's limited security, as such incidents are quite rare in Japan. Once everything was ready, Shinji struck a match, and everything started to burn. When the first people realized there was a fire, they attempted to escape through the emergency exits, but they were blocked. They ran towards the central exit where Shinji was present, still holding a gasoline container, and he began to douse the employees trying to escape while saying the word "die." This caused many people to run out into the street engulfed in flames. In just a moment, smoke had already reached the second floor of the building. And for those inside, it was too late to evacuate without suffering injuries. The building was completely engulfed in smoke in less than 2 minutes, making it difficult to breathe, and gradually, the animation studio workers began to lose consciousness due to the lack of oxygen. Most of the company's employees were on the top floor because the attack occurred during a meeting with executives from another company. It's unclear if Shinji planned this to claim more victims, but unfortunately, that day there were more people in the building than usual. To make matters worse, shortly after, an explosion rocked the building, causing the flames to burst through the windows and doors of the studio. The police believe that the combination of air and flames led to the explosion. As the fire grew, people inside the building tried to escape the flames. The majority of the victims, specifically 19 of them, were found on the third floor near the stairs leading to the emergency exit on the roof. These individuals unknowingly ended up on this staircase, which acted like an oven. After causing this hellish scene, Shinji accidentally set himself on fire with the same gasoline he had used to try to burn his victims. This led him to flee the scene, but an employee of Kyoto Animation did not accept this and started to chase him. Eventually, they all ended up at a train station located 100 meters from where Shinji was finally apprehended by 2 police officers from the same station. The fire was completely extinguished after 5 hours of immense efforts by the police and firefighters. It was at this point that the authorities were able to accurately count the victims of the incident. In this attack, 36 people lost their lives, while another 34 were left with serious injuries. Of the deceased, 28 died from carbon monoxide poisoning, 6 succumbed to their burns, and 2 passed away while receiving medical treatment at the hospital. It was reported that 2/3 of the fatal victims who worked at the studio were women, as Kyoto Animation was known for hiring women in almost all of its animation positions. After spending 10 months in the hospital, Shinji was officially arrested and processed. There were concerns about his physical health, and questions arose as to whether he would be physically capable of enduring the lengthy trial schedule ahead of him. His hospital treatment had taken so long because he had suffered burns on 90% of his body. In such cases, skin donors are crucial, but the Japanese authorities correctly prioritized obtaining donors for the victims. As for Shinji, he had no other option but to accept artificial skin, becoming the first person to undergo such a significant surgery of this kind without using real skin transplants. The judicial processes in Japan are known to be slow, as they usually involve multiple stages before a clear conviction is obtained. Since the trials for Shinji began, he underwent numerous psychiatric and psychological evaluations to determine if he was mentally healthy at the time of the crime. The results were somewhat mixed because, on one hand, it was clear that Shinji's brain did not function normally, but on the other hand, he was aware of what he was doing, making it difficult to predict what sentence he would receive. The decision had to be something between the death penalty and life imprisonment. The world was deeply affected by this crime, especially the animation industry. After the fire, an American anime licensor launched a successful GoFundMe campaign with a goal of $750,000 to assist the studio and the victims' families. In less than 24 hours, they raised over $1 million for this purpose. Even the then Prime Minister of Japan expressed condolences to the families, a figure many may recognize as he was assassinated a couple of years later. The president of Kyoto Animation mentioned that he did not plan to rebuild the studio in the same location, as it would be traumatic and bring bad memories for the employees. Instead, he considered demolishing the remains of the studio to create a park with a monument dedicated to the staff and the local community. Today, most of Kyoto Animation's employees have returned to work, this time in the company's second studio. One of these employees is a veteran manga artist who has been working at Kyoto Animation since the 1980s. He returned to work after the incident, having recovered from the injuries he sustained. He mentioned that he feels better when he is working than resting. He also expressed his intention to make his future work a tribute to those who perished. Another significant detail worth mentioning is that, as a result of this tragedy, Japan decided to implement a new law. It requires citizens to present identification and provide reasons for their gasoline purchases when buying it in liters or containers. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.